So, today I want to talk about language learning and how it helps you connect with other cultures. So, this video will be a vlog, which is a little different than my usual mini documentary style videos. If you're new to this channel, in a nutshell, I cover everything that includes cross-cultural communication. So, sometimes that's what happens between two countries, sometimes it's between people from different countries. So, basically, I want to bring the world closer together and break down language and cultural barriers. So if you're interested in this topic, subscribe and hit the notification bell to see more videos. I got into this topic based on my experience living in different countries and learning French, Spanish, Japanese, and even some Chinese. I'm so fascinated with how different cultures see the world differently. In some ways, each culture is its own universe, with its own rules and its own assumptions. And language learning is one of the keys that allows you access to that universe. Today, I'm going to draw on my experience living abroad in France and Japan as an American. So, when I was 13, I moved with my parents to a small town in Burgundy. There was no international school, so I had to learn French by immersion. So, I was really excited for this adventure before we went, but I definitely didn't know what I was getting myself into. It was a really tough adjustment, but it absolutely shaped who I am as a person today, and I'm really grateful to my parents for the opportunity. I wish I remembered all the things that I noticed when I was first there. I should have kept a journal, but I do remember a few things. I remember just being really taken aback by the hierarchy of French schools. So for example, you have to stand up and wait for the teacher to tell you to sit down at the beginning of the class. And compared to American middle schools, it just felt very old-fashioned, and it seems like in the US the teacher is more like your friend, like they're not actually your friend, but there's a more informal relationship with the teacher. While learning French, I learned that a lot of English words come from French, but they don't always mean the same thing. So there's false friends or faux amis. For example, the school that I attended was called a collège, but it wasn't a college, it was a middle school. It's a very, innocent one, but I also learned that to be excité does not mean to be excited. Healthy food doesn't have préservatif, it has conservateur. A very different meaning in French and English, and embarrassing to get that one wrong. So French is much more formal, especially compared to American English, so you differentiate between tu and vous when speaking to someone, so it's important to know your relationship to that person, especially when you're a kid, adults are usually always vous, so that's something that was just very different for me. Another thing is you always say bonjour when you're entering a store and au revoir when you're leaving, even if it's just the bakery, even if you don't even live in that town. Who said the French weren't polite? Don't get me started on French numbers, because I honestly still get tripped up when someone tells me a number slowly and they're like 99, and I'm trying to write it down and then I have to erase it immediately. I just don't get the logic of that at all. I feel really privileged to have read some French classics in their original language, and finally, after so much time and so much effort, to sometimes be mistaken for a native speaker by people who are not very good at telling that sort of thing for about 5 minutes. But I do have an accent, but it's not very strong. I speak very colloquially, and I know a lot of French expressions, like for example, vouloir avoir son beurre et l'argent du beurre, which honestly makes so much more sense than have your cake and eat it too. So on this long journey from barely speaking French to being a near native speaker, I've learned a lot about language learning. Most people won't have the opportunity to live in a foreign country for 5 years, let alone a foreign school system. It was a once-in-a-life opportunity for me. But still, there's so much to be gained by learning a language, even just learning the basics. I've proven this as I've become fluent in French and Spanish, and proficient in Japanese, and able to get by in some basic Chinese. So I moved to Japan a few years ago as part of the JET program. Basically, the Japanese government recruits native English speakers to come be assistant language teachers in schools all over Japan. And I really mean all over, because I went to a very small town, kind of in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by mountains and covered by snow for 4 months of the year. A lot of snow. And Japan's worldview is very different from France or the US, and their culture has a lot of rules. So they don't expect foreigners to know most of the rules, but I still always tried to be respectful and follow them as best as I could. Learning Japanese was pretty easy at first, just to know the basics, but it gets more complicated as you go along. So I don't want to discourage anyone from learning Japanese, it's totally worth it. It's not that it's difficult, it's just completely different from English. French has maybe 60% of vocabulary in common with English, and Japanese has maybe 10%, and they're not words that you use all the time. So it takes time to learn all that new vocabulary. Reading and writing are more complicated than English, but honestly, it's its own system, and once you study enough, you kind of get the hang of it, and there's a logic to it. It's just a different way of thinking, and I think really fascinating in its own right. But yeah, Japanese culture can be very formal, and the language reflects this. So there's a lot of passive voice, which is kind of discouraged in American English. There's a special kind of language called keigo, which use different words and different verbs. So it kind of depends on the hierarchy of like where you are and who you're talking to. So the more formal the conversation, you kind of avoid directly addressing the person. There's a lot that's implied. At the beginning of the conversation, once it's established who you're talking about or what you're talking about and you're eavesdropping, you may not have any idea what they're talking about. It's just like impossible to follow. I have to say I love making puns in any language, and Japanese is excellent for puns because there's so many homonyms, like words that sound the same. So it's really easy to make puns in Japanese, and they have like a special category for this called oyaji gag, or uncle jokes, basically dad jokes. They're very situation based, so I can't really think of anything off the top of my head, but I will put a link below if you want to see some examples. One way I've connected to Japanese culture through language learning is studying song lyrics. So it's first of all nice to understand the meaning of the song that you listen to it for a while, maybe you have no idea what they're saying, but when you study it, you get the idea of what they're saying, whether you read a translation or you just do the translation yourself, which I think is more helpful. I'm the kind of person that really connects to music, and especially music with lyrics. I wasn't a big fan of certain genres of Japanese music, which are probably the easiest to access. Once I started finding the same kind of music that I would listen to in my own language, but in Japanese, I started finding favorite artists and favorite songs. And that motivated me to want to study the lyrics and know what they're saying. Studying the lyrics really broke down the language barrier for me and helped me connect with the Japanese language in a way that I didn't expect. I found myself having an emotional connection to songs like I do in English. Honestly, I really suggest it. If you want to get good at a language and you want to really stay motivated, song lyrics are great. Learning languages has been a sometimes fun, sometimes challenging, but overall really enriching experience. So if you're interested in learning a language but you haven't started, I really encourage you just to start with the basics. Just learn the basics and you can use that when you travel. It's a good starting point for you to go further with your language learning if you find that you enjoy it. Although intermediate learners can hit a plateau where you feel like you're not making any progress, and that's normal. You really just have to keep going and make it a habit to do something every day because it does add up. You do keep making progress, you just have to keep with it. So just think back to what drove you in the first place to learn the language. What made you passionate about it? Was there like music? Was there a movie? Is there people in your life that make you want to use that language, or a place that you really love? I think that that's important to stay motivated, and habit is so crucial for language learning, even if you're just doing a little bit every day. So language learning is really worth it, and I encourage anyone to give it a shot or to keep with it if you're frustrated, or to enjoy it if you're enjoying it. But language learning is really the key to accessing this whole universe that you didn't even know existed. Are you learning a language now, or do you want to? What languages are you interested in? Let me know in the comments, and I'd be so interested to hear what everyone's learning.